Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Okay, so I'm just here really, really quickly because one of you lovelies asked about how do we deal with the schools and universities who are imposing vaccines and masks. So we're going to go through kind of this super sneaky little thing that I found. And I did kind of do this yesterday, but it didn't work. So I'm doing it as a proper recording. I did a document for you all with links. So gone back to doing it like that rather. I tried to do a voice note, but tech happens. So, okay, first things first. We're going to be talking about how to get the schools and universities to comply and stop pushing vaccines, to stop pushing masks in the UK. So first things first, the process. Now, it's really important we kind of follow the schools' processes and universities, right? So we're going to do it's a two-pronged approach to kind of get them to comply, but you have to play by their rules. This is the problem with using lawful means, is it's not fast, right? It can be really frustrating. It's really slow. It's not fast. So the first thing you've got to do is go to your school or your university website, and I would just download every single policy that they have, right? You want to find out what their complaints procedure is. You want to see if they've got a medical treatment policy, a quality policy, health and safety policy, cybersecurity, data protection policy, all of those different things which they may be breaching if they are demanding masks, or if they're demanding children are vaccinated. That's what are they doing? How are they protecting your data and things like that? And you'll be surprised at how many schools and universities don't actually have the policies. They're not robust, right? They really, you could just pick them apart. So you need to go through their policies with a fine-tooth comb and see where they're breaking their own policies by what they're doing. So if they have got an equality policy, which says, we treat everybody with love, kindness, respect, and they're not doing that, you use that. I said on page of policy, you state in our communication so far, you have dismissed my concerns. They usually say things like, we work cohesively with parents, and so they will be breaking their policies left, right, and centre. So that's where you need to start. But at the beginning, you do need to state that I'm writing to inform you I'm making an official complaint with regards to breaches of. So you just writing a letter or an email or saying I'm concerned is not the same language. The words you use are really important. So an official complaint, it follows the official complaints procedure. So usually what happens is you complain to the head teacher, then you go to the chair of governors, then you go to local authority, then you go to Ofsted, and then you go to the Department of Education. And so say, I expect all of this to be responded to within 14 days. If I hear nothing back from you, I will be contacting chair of governors to express my concerns over the following, but also your handling of the complaint. Now, what people don't realise is that it is the governors and or executive board, if it's a kind of a trust or a university, so it's slightly different, but it's the executive body or the governors who actually are responsible for hiring and firing the head teachers. And so we're going to be talking about breaking criminal law in a minute. I can tell you it does not matter how pally the governors and the chairs are with the head teachers. The governors are the people who will go to prison for the head teacher being fucked up. So if the head teacher fucks up, they may go to prison as well, but so will the governors. It's the governor's responsibility to make sure that the school are adhering to laws and legislations. It's the head teacher's responsibility to ensure that the school is being run and the curriculum is being taught. So so head teachers and principals they deal with education, and it's the governing bodies who deal with ensuring laws are adhered to, right? So it's the governors who come under fire. But you have to be really explicit about when, like, they need to know that you know what you're doing. But you can't really kind of create a template for this, because each individual school and organization and trust will have their own policies. So you have to go through their website. So just go, take screenshots of the website, and make a note of every single time, like, what they're doing isn't complying with what they say they are going to do, right? That's how you do it. So I've come up against schools before with regards to mistreatment of the young kids that I've been working with, and this is the way you do it: is you just bend them over a barrel by going through their actual policies. And so the reason why that matters is that the policies that are on the school's websites will be taken from their studies, which means that their duties as an educational institution grounded in law. Now, schools are slightly different to universities, and private is slightly different to public. However, if they have government money and government funding, they still fall under this. So it still counts, right? It still counts. So once you have kind of been through all of their policies, and you've literally pulled apart all of the things that they say they're going to do and they're not, and you've got clear evidence. So hopefully if you've had conversations with them before, you'll have evidence of this, but you'll also have evidence, just maybe conversations or letters that they've sent out to you, or random text messages that they've sent to you. Now, I would recommend that even if there's like a few of you in the school who are on the same wavelength, you all do this independently. It scares them more if multiple individuals are saying the same thing than everybody kind of banding together. If, however, you then start pursuing it through the courts, I would band together. But if you want to go straight to the schools and the universities first, because you will be able to get them to move and get them to respond faster than if you then go to the courts. But you may have to if they refuse to comply. So first thing, step number 1 is go through all of their policies. Step number 2 is remind them of the lawful duties that they're breaking. So if your child has said no to wearing a mask, or to being vaccinated, or to PCR testing, or any of those things, is your child has lawfully refused to consent. So lawful exemption. This is they have a lawful exemption. You don't need a medical exemption. They've got a lawful exemption if they say no. So if they don't have capacity, i.e. if you are a parent of a child who has a known mental health condition, and therefore they could argue doesn't have capacity, you as the parent are the legal guardian, the lawful guardian. So if you refuse consent, then they have to follow through, right? So it doesn't matter whether they disagree with your decision or not, is any medical procedures, which includes testing, so that's PCR testing, lateral flow testing is a medical test. So it's testing, treatment, or procedure. So a treatment is a vaccine or a mask, or and then a procedure is a vaccine. So any of those things are covered under the Mental Capacity Act, which is why I get really fucked off that people aren't talking about it, because this literally your lawful exemption, you just say no. Yeah, just say no. It doesn't matter. Like, they can't come back from that. Hey Helen, yes, thank you. It's hay fever kicked in, and I suffer really bad, so I did emergency hay fever prescription, and was back to normal by Saturday, thankfully. But thank you. So the other thing they're breaching is section 45A of the Health and Disease Act 1984, which says no vaccination can be mandated by law. So this is by the so they can't mandate it. They can't force you to have a vaccination, whether that's with regards to traveling, whether regards to coming into the school. It is, you just can't do it, right? It's against the law. Then we've got, they'll be breaching Section 1, Part 1 of the Medicines for Human Use Clinical Trial Regulations. So this also falls into informed consent. They are still in clinical trial, and like subsection 5 says, if any person is an adult and they are unable by virtue of physical or mental capacity to give informed consent, or has prior to the onset of incapacity refused to give informed consent, taking part in the clinical trial, that person cannot be included as a subject in the clinical trial. So if you say no, if your child says no, then you can't be forced into the clinical trials. And because the clinical trials are still underway, they're still in trial, right? So either whether they want to argue they're in trial or not, so they can't because it's still in clinical trial. They can't because you say no anyway, and they can't with regards to vaccinations because it's a breach of Section 45A. So then we've also got, with regards to masks, is if they attempt any kind of legally enforcing after tomorrow, they are in breach of the health protection coronavirus wearing a face covering regulation in England, right? So England, Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland slightly different, but this is England specifically. I'm pretty sure everybody else has followed suit, but just double check. But they can't do it. So nobody can force you. And we're going to talk about how they actually couldn't anyway. But this is if people are saying, because there's those 100 schools who are saying that they are going to enforce the mask mandates even after the government gets rid of them, well, they are breaking the law by doing that. So these are actual legislations and laws. So they can't. It's expired and that's it. So it is no longer in law after that date. So the other thing I do, so first things first, you kind of rip apart all of their policies, procedures, and what they're saying on their website, schools and universities individually. Step number 2 is you give them those kind of 3 laws, just to let them know that this is the actual like long-standing laws, right? Step number 3 is I would give them these kind of like links stroke attachments. So in the eyes of the law, ignorance is not a defense. However, I would recommend making them aware of expert opinions with regards to masking and with regards to what the House of Lords has been saying since pretty much the House of Lords have been kind of kicking off since November 2020. And everybody seems to be ignoring the fact that the changes in what we see in regulations is because of what's going on from the House of Lords. So then we have to go back to why the House of Lords kind of kicking off. And that's because we, the people, keep filling in petitions. We keep responding to the consultations. So it's us responding to the consultations and us doing petitions, which forces the House of Lords to actually, they pay attention to what's going on, right? So we, the people are doing this. So don't think that anytime you're filling it, like the petitions matter and the consultations matter. This is where we're actually getting things changed, and why we still in England have I would say probably the only country that's never actually put vaccine passports in place. They never managed to get them off the ground, and we will kind of get rid of everything ASAP. Okay, so Tory's lawsuit, you've got the link there, but actually I've also got the separate link to Stephen Petty's affidavit, which talks about masks and the harms they cause, because some schools are still kind of pushing masks. Then there's some really, these are quotes by the House of Lords. So this is the government by diktat, which is the thing that was done in November. But this is something, so the use and scrutiny of emergency powers. So this is, I think this was September. No, wait a minute. This one is the June 2021 one. So we've got in a report, these are actual, the House of Lords, individual Lords quotes. In a report published in July 2021 entitled Rule of Law Themes from COVID-19 Regulations, The JCSI also expressed concern that guidance has been used in the context of the pandemic response in a way that appears to attempt to impose more severe restrictions than are imposed by law by presenting the guidance to the public as if it were law that compelled guidance, and that there appears to have been an unwillingness to distinguish between the wishes of government expressed informally or in guidance and the requirements of the law, which has been a feature of the government's response to the coronavirus pandemic, despite this issue having been raised by parliamentary committees at various stages in 2020 and 2021. The issue was also raised by the Constitution Committee in its report published in June 2021 entitled COVID-19 and the Use and Scrutiny of Emergency Powers, by the House of Commons Justice Committee in its report published in September 2021 entitled COVID-19 and the Criminal Law. So in the House of Lords COVID-19 and the use of scrutiny of emergency powers, there is a quote that says, the government's use of guidance and statements to the media have in some instances undermined legal certainty by laying claim to legal requirements that do not exist. The government does not have and must not assume authority to mandate public behaviour other than as required by law. Guidance and media statements are not legislation and should not be presented or treated as such. So you're making the argument that they cannot force you to have a vaccine. They cannot force you to wear a mask. They cannot force you to have a test because you have lawfully declined to do so, as is your lawful exemption, your lawful right. You've said no, and that's just it, right? It's tough shit. The government cannot mandate your behavior other than what as is required by criminal law, and the criminal laws are the ones that you're responding to, right? So the government's coronavirus legislations are not criminal laws. So there's difference between criminal, civil, all of those other things. So you are going off actual law with case law that they cannot circumvent. They are creating legislation and regulations and guidance. Like, so your lack of consent supersedes everything that they're doing right now. And this is pretty much what the House of Lords is saying, is the government is just saying shit. They're saying it as a statement, and they can't fucking do it. You can't do it. And so then we have this silver bullet, and this is where you will really kind of shit up the pretty much anybody, I guess. So this is kind of a focus on schools and universities because that's where, you know, a lot of the problems are right at the moment. But while I was going through the case law, specific university case law, there's lots of law cases about asbestos. So what was happening, you know, lots of buildings were created, they had asbestos in, and, you know, 30, 40, 50 years later, the people were getting cancer and dying. So there is already a recognised causal link between asbestos and cancer. Right? There is a causal link between asbestos and cancer. Therefore, in order to successfully sue a university for causing death, if somebody has a specific, so mesothelioma is the specific kind of cancer that's linked to asbestos. So if somebody worked in a university, for example, 50 years ago, they developed this mesothelioma, they don't need to prove that they got the exposure at the university. If they worked there and they developed this condition, they don't need to prove direct causation because it's already proven that there is that causal link, right? So this is why I was saying it's important you submit the TOR stuff with regards to the masks, but also there's so much evidence stroke research about the vaccines as well. So you pick whichever one you want. So if you you know, go to Daily Expose and get the links for whether it's a school, so you've got children with increased myocarditis, or, you know, if your kid is a footballer, or so I haven't kind of included links. So it's a vaccine, like pick the ones which are most relevant to you. There is enough to show a causal link between vaccines and harm, right? So that's there, that's already there. And even we've had the coroner's reports, right? So the coroner reports with regards to the AstraZeneca vaccine that have killed people. So there is a causal link already proven that vaccines can kill. So why is this the silver bullet? Is you don't need to kind of, I mean, we don't want, right? We don't want anybody getting a vaccine and dying from it and then being like, well, we told you. But actually the silver bullet is already laid out in law, is that you don't need to prove a direct causation of the condition from so if you're forcing a child to have a vaccination, which is unlawful, there's already proven causal links, is therefore the school or university are the ones who will be held liable. That's the point. So if your child is forced to have a vaccine, and then a complication ensues, they are tortiously liable. It's their fault. So this then goes into like assault and battery, and into neglect and all of those other things. So, but they're liable because there's a causal link already done between vaccines and potential harm, particularly when it comes to coronavirus vaccines. There's decades of research, right? So this is the kind of silver bullet step. And once I finish the injunction, which it should, I'm so close. I really am so close, guys. I promise. You will then have all of the other information, which will help with this bit. But the first two parts of kind of this 3-step process will probably take you a few days anyway. So by the time this little bit makes so much more sense, you will be able to have our injunction as well, which you can submit. So it's like, even though ignorance is not a defense in law, they will not be able to be ignorant at all. Like, it's tough shit. And if they choose not to read it, that's their own fault. If they then continue, they are knowingly and willingly causing harm. So it gets even more, you have even more kind of what's the word, more evidence, more proof, and more to kind of kick them with, really. But I just thought this was really interesting, that as soon as all of the evidence comes out about the vaccines, is that anybody who was forced to take it in a care home, or anybody who's taken it to keep their job, once that it has been established that vaccines, so it was already been established that vaccines can kill, right? So all you do is you can now sue for whatever complications that show up, is you sue the person who forced you to have it. I mean, you could have just refused, but I mean, that's why the lawsuit's important, because you didn't have informed consent, because you were psychologically weaponed and into it. So here's the kind of super sneaky thing that I didn't find out until I was kind of looking into the case law, is there was a guy in Scotland, a young lad in Scotland, who did an FOI request to the University of Glasgow. Basically, he was asking for, I think basically his score wasn't good, and he wanted to know what the scores were, like grades. He was doing an FOI request on grades. Basically what happened, he did an FOI request and the University of Glasgow ignored it. And so then he went to the Information Commissioner, and that took it outside of the university's hands. It took it outside of the chain of command for the education department. So traditional route, you have to go head teacher or principal, to then go chair of governors or chair of executive board, then to the LEA, then to Ofsted, then to the Department of Education. So it takes like a while, and they're all cover each other's backs, right? So if you, at the same time as you kind of send your email making your official complaint, you send an FOI with regards to their risk assessments and impact assessments of the psychological and physiological impact on COVID policies, including masking, forced vaccination, exclusion, segregation, all of those different things. If they fail to respond to you within 28 days, then you can go to the Information Commissioner, and they are then breaching the FOI laws. But also, if they are then enforcing medical procedures contrary to health and safety without doing the risk assessments and the impact assessments, that's another freaking barrel you can hold them over. And actually, you will shit them up by doing this because they won't have done them. They won't have done them. And if they say that they're using it based on the government, like that, the government haven't done them. And we already have the House of Lords stating the government haven't done them. But also, the schools have to do their own. They have to. They can't just use the government's. And if they are saying they're using the government, then they need to produce them. But this was kind of, I never even thought about doing FOIs to schools. But you can do an FOI with regards to numbers of teachers who are vaccinated and who are off sick, numbers of teachers who are unvaccinated and who have been off sick. I mean, you can ask them about all of those different things that they should be cataloguing and recording, because you don't want names. You want numbers of children who have had who are vaccinated and have been ill, unvaccinated have been ill. Like, you can just ask them all of those different things, and I would do it in an FOI request, as well as you want all of their risk assessment and the impact assessment of forcing impact assessment psychologically on children who potentially have lived in environments where they've experienced abuse and trauma, the developmental effects of not being able to, you know, for particularly like young children, developmental effects of not being able to see the teacher's mouth moving while they are learning, you know, and learning to read, write and comprehend, developmental effects, the poor outcomes with regards to educational outcomes, with regards to children who have undiagnosed hearing difficulties, not being able to lip read, or like, there's also, you know, we know that it's bacterial pneumonia that caused most of the deaths in the Spanish flu, and that's come out, right? There's a report about that. There was the Florida investigation into kids and the shit on their masks. So we know that masks cause harm. It's already a pre-causal link. So wearing a mask, you're going to get bacterial pneumonia. Wearing a mask for extended periods, the evidence is already there, and they can't have done a risk assessment, because if they have, then they are knowingly and willingly putting your children's health at risk, knowingly and willingly causing harm, knowingly and willingly, like all of these other things. So that's what I would do with schools. And so it doesn't just have to be with schools, right? If you are in employment, you do the same thing. You have to go to their policies and procedures. You have to get your contract out. You have to get the handbook out. You have to find out which things that they're breaking. You have to go step by step by step. So if it is a completely private entity, you won't be able to do an FOI request. So that's the only kind of thing. So it's a lot easier to go after public bodies. But you can do the same thing for your council. You can do the same thing because the councils are the ones who took the money off the government to, you know, put all of these things in place with regards to masking, with regards to vaccination centres, and not allowing you on public transport, and stuff like that. So they've been enforcing it. So you do it to them as well if you want. But like I say, the injunction is I'm going to walk the dogs now, and then I'm going to go crack on with that. But I just wanted to make sure I spent some time kind of really putting this together for you, give you some ideas of how to kind of go ahead. So do you need a lawyer? I mean, not at the beginning, I wouldn't. I think it would be slower. But if they don't engage with you, then I would just go to one of the no win, no fee lawyers. Like the no win, no fee lawyers have been set up because they took away legal aid, right? So they took away legal aid and instead set up this whole no win, no fee thing. So you go to them and they're supposed to fight on your behalf, right? And the thing is, if you then go to a no win, no fee lawyer who doesn't do their job, there are other no win, no fee lawyers who go after shitty no win, no fee lawyers, right? But we don't necessarily want to go into that whole kind of like law chasing law. If you kind of if there's like even 10 of you in a school or 10 of you in a university all saying the exact same thing, very specific to your own children, it doesn't look like you're, I mean, so absolutely do join together and have these conversations together and kind of write this thing together, but to make it super, super specific to your kids, and file it, and just make sure that on the exact same day you file the FOI request, and they will go to 2 different departments as well. But the wording is, official complaint. So I was a governor for a primary school. I was the vice chair of governors for a primary school for a couple of years. And so, I mean, I freaking made sure that they weren't doing anything that was contrary to the laws, because I was not prepared to go to prison. I was not prepared to go to prison. So the governors are the ones who will go to prison if the schools are breaking the law. So that's why you only give the head teacher 14 days to respond, or the principal 14 days to respond. Because once you then send letter to a formal complaint with regards to the head teacher and you direct it to the governors, they then know it's them who's going to go to fucking prison. Because they didn't realize this, right? They didn't know this, and they will throw the heads under the bus. They will. So one of I have been on I've been on a panel because I was a vice chair. So I've been on a panel where they have been, the head teacher was not a good head teacher, and parents had complained, and the complaint hadn't been appropriately dealt with. And so then the parents complained to the chair of governors, and then it gets sent. The other chairs and vice governors come in as well. So we were external. We came and we sat, and we found the head teacher kind of like guilty of covering up and neglect of this child and causing the child harm, and the head teacher was sacked. So because if we hadn't, right, so here's the thing, if we hadn't have found that head teacher, I mean 100% they were guilty, right, really guilty, this poor child. But if we hadn't found them guilty, the next step is to go to the local authority, and we, the chair of governors, are investigated. So this kind of breaks the idea of colluding. Like if I collude with a head teacher to cause harm to a child because I hate the parent, is I can then go to prison. So I ain't going to do it. Because this is the best thing about self-preservation. I mean, most of the time it's really fucking annoying, but actually when you start pushing back, is people don't want to go to prison. People don't want to lose their careers over something else. And when it comes to governors and being on executive boards, and councillors and stuff like that, it's pretty much the only reason, this is what I noticed, the only reason they do that sort of stuff is because they want status in society, right? They want to be able to say, well, I'm, the chair of governor for such and such, or I'm a governor for, or I'm, the councillor for is people don't give a shit about the people they're looking after. It was all about status and standing in society, and they don't want They don't want other people to know how corrupt and useless and shitty they are. Now, the other thing is most governors, so in schools, they tend not to be... they tend to be like ex-teachers, and they tend to be like mates of the head teachers, right? So they don't know their lawful duties. And even though most local authorities put together really good packages of training and education and understanding and helping them know, is they still don't get it. They still don't understand. And they've been in place for like decades. So they will never have had somebody kind of come at them with the law, and they're just regular people. They're regular people, and they will not. So I keep saying they will not want to go to prison. And at the moment, they're paying. These are all the people who are watching the BBC, right? They're all that kind of people. So particularly with schools and universities, these are the lefty loonies. These are the people who are recruited very early on, who are indoctrinated very early on. But what they believe they're doing is right, and they're all the social justice warriors. But then when you go, well, actually, you're breaking the law and I'm going to send you to prison for it, they will change that tune. So I hope that was kind of helpful. Have yourselves an amazing rest of your Tuesday. I will be here as normal tomorrow night. I'll talk through kind of what's going on in the real world. But hopefully that was helpful, and have an amazing rest of your day.